True Hospitality by Keturah Lamb, read by Sarah Levesque. We women outnumbered the guys at our Monday night fellowship by at least 5-1. A new guy had everyone curious and excited. This particular guy was different than most of those who would visit. At once I could tell he sought community. Tenderly he shared his heart, even as no one but my brother visibly seemed to care. His story was ridiculously sad. At 18, he left his home to study for a degree in another state, because that is what the world says one must do to be successful. Despite it all, life was good. He worked at a ranch, which he loved, but he hurt his back and was unable to continue working. His funds were drained by hospital bills. His back needed rest to heal completely, so he was unable to get any other job. His family told him to figure it out. He was an adult on his own. He went to his pastor, asked for help, and was told, "That's what welfare is for." He hadn't returned to church since then, he told us. To be honest, he said, I couldn't stand Christians for a long time after. It's just recently that I've started seeing God unconnected to my experience. I feel this has been a test to my faith, and I want to find a body of believers to fellowship with once more. He refused to go on welfare. Instead, he let his apartment go and lived in the woods, eating what he could trap, working as much as he could to pay off his studies, hoping that when the nights were cold enough, one of his classmates would kindly share a bed. Occasionally they would. I'm mostly better now, he told us. I'm at a place where I can work again, and I love my job. I'm working for a gunsmith. But I'm still having a really hard time understanding why the church isn't more interested in being involved in my life. The friends that supplemented my food and offered me shelter while I was in the woods were not Christians. At the time, I was such a shy girl and could hardly speak a sentence to a guy. I've always regretted not telling him thank you for sharing his story, especially as I watched the rest of the crowd laugh at his vulnerability. All they could say was, "We are so glad you are finding your faith again," with a hint of disapproval that he'd blame the church for any of his issues. As if his pain mattered not at all, and as if he should have just accepted government aid. He never came back to our fellowship, as far as I know. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within your land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand against your poor brother. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 7. God helps those who help themselves. Give a hand up, not a hand out. The tragic thing is that Christians quote these secular proverbs most. A study was done a few years back on our local homeless, saying how well they did, and how some of them were able to afford fancy homes with the money they begged. Statistics showed that the homeless population increased dramatically after that. It's unfair to say that Christians didn't help the homeless after that. They continued to have what we call safe charities, organizations where people must come for certain types of offered help. But as for actually reaching out and inviting the poor into our homes, yeah, most of the homeless don't actually need our help. Did you see that article that came out last month? Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seekest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh? Isaiah chapter 58, verse 7. I'm not advocating that we give $5 to every man or woman begging. Rather, I'm suggesting that instead of saying most of them don't really need help, we should be asking ourselves, what am I doing to help those who truly need? If my father owns anything, it is absolute generosity. I know only one other man, a dear friend, who matches my father's unconditional, complete love for his fellow man. I have not always had the capacity to appreciate this self-sacrificing virtue. Sometimes I've even wondered, as others berated us and my father for his willingness to give to just anybody, if it were really a virtue. Growing up, we rarely had our house to ourselves. One of the first people I remember is a hitchhiker Dad brought home for a single night. I was 6 or 7. We lived in a mobile home next door to our landlord. To all outside appearances, we had nothing, and were just starting out in life ourselves. The guy wanted work, and so he stayed on, sleeping on our couch. I remember loving to sit on this hitchhiker's lap as he told stories. Mom told me I couldn't do that anymore, that it was very naughty. I said I wouldn't, but the next day I promptly forgot and let him pick me up. After a few moments, I saw Mom glaring at me. Ashamed, I jumped off his lap and ran to my room, unsure why it was so wrong, hoping only Mom wouldn't think to give me a whipping later. Even so, I loved having people live with us. Some of my most fond memories are during such times. All of us children shared a single room. Our numbers grew from 6 to 9 as the time progressed. A family of 6 shared my brother's old room. An uncle stayed in our pantry. 2 young couples and their babies each had campers parked out back. There was another single fellow that stayed wherever there was room, sometimes on our couch. We all lived in a mobile home that we now owned on land we had bought until we moved to a duplex in a nearby city. Some of the people came along with us, and there were always new additions before, during, and after. I knew Dad gave the men work, that we were giving these people a place to stay because they had nowhere else to go. I vaguely knew what we did wasn't normal, but I also knew we were better at getting along with strangers than most. In fact, that's how we met some of those who stayed with us. They'd been living with someone else, but hadn't been able to mesh. As a kid, I thought this ridiculous. How hard was it just to work things out? I love having a constant variety of people to share my stories with, to learn new things from. One lady taught me some Spanish. I was encouraged to do great things through these people who were barely getting by, and so, in my mind, they were great. And yet, I would sympathize with my mom when she didn't like the people. Even as she said, "I don't like her," I'd think, "Mom is right, but it's okay for me to still like her." I think I started hating it in my mid-teens, when the majority of the men staying with us were no longer so much older than me. As a 15-year-old, I still thought them too old. And yet, I was no longer a friendly child, but often accused of flirting. I grew so self-conscious, I would hide when Dad brought people home, the only way I could think of to restrain myself from speaking too much or not acting in a way that might be thought provocative. I found all the men so interesting and wanted to hear all their stories. And yet, I didn't like what my mother said, and if I were honest, the men were starting to look at me in ways that didn't make me comfortable. Dad told Mom she was being silly, until I had 2 marriage proposals. Out of that grew my extreme shyness toward men, to such a point that I wouldn't be able to talk to any man for years to come. Thankfully, I've mostly grown out of that, yet it returns at such strange times. As I started working and pitching in, I began to see what Dad did as an extreme evil. Our family was always hurting. No one ever helped us as much as we were killing ourselves to help everyone else. I grew to crave privacy. I found the men Dad brought home repulsive. I judged the families harshly. I hated the women, who I saw cry to my dad only to snarl at my mother. If someone stepped over their bounds, I'd snap at them and tell them to stay. Remember, we were helping them, and they didn't deserve to demand anything. The cute girl everyone had adored was now feared. When we had unsavory people show up at our door and Dad wasn't home, Mom would send me. I would be the one that said, "No, you can't come in. And no, you can't take Dad's tools. I don't care if you think they belong to you. I don't care if you want to call the sheriff. Use your own phone. I'm sorry, you were harassing me. I said don't come in. Don't you dare even try. Goodbye." Even my own family seemed terrified of me. Inside, I was scared and hurting. I didn't really hate these people. Part of me did feel bad. But a larger piece of me was so worried for my own family and my inability to change the path I thought we were stuck on. We were taken advantage of, I thought, and yet so many people left angry because we didn't do enough or didn't do something right. Dad received death threats. We girls were threatened, but Dad contacted the necessary authorities and we continued to live, fearlessly, doing right. We barely got by some months, and yet we never told anyone no when they asked for help. And I hated this. I just wanted to say no for all of us. To the ladies who played my father, to those that forced Mom or Dad to have to keep a careful eye on us kids, to all the capable men who begged so Dad gave what was meant for our rent, to all the people who I felt could do more. As we were stretched beyond our limits, I wanted to tell them all to leave us alone. I told Dad, it's not right for you to be helping others before us. He said, have we ever not been able to make ends meet? Yes, it's been hard, but we've managed. And we never know what problems, even emotional, these people are facing. Still, selfishly, I persisted. But what about us? Then I met that boy at our Bible study and saw my friends laugh at him. And I knew that my father would have understood, and that we would have given him everything he needed, no conditions attached. I was ashamed. I saw that there was no love in my heart, only fear. I started thinking of all the men who'd stayed with us, who I'd once liked and who I now avoided. Men who hadn't known the blessings that I took for granted, with beautiful minds who only wanted something good. Rather than being upset they'd wanted something else from me, I found empathy for them. I remembered the families we'd helped. Some of them started contacting me on Facebook, and I saw the good that had been worked through us. I still couldn't stand some of the witches that had stayed with us, but I learned that I could still show them love. In fact, I realized I must show even these women respect and love. I have come to a place where I am so glad my father is who he is. Recently, we had a Nazi woman, a hitchhiker, a father and his grown son, among others, living with us. I do still find myself struggling with bitter feelings, asking if each of these people really need what they ask for. But I finally had to accept that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if they're undeserving. What matters is if I'm doing right. We are specifically told to feed and clothe the poor and to invite them into our homes. Yet how many of us do it? There is a whole chapter on loving, a whole book on it, to be honest, and yet we have so many excuses not to love those we don't like. And yes, some of these people are undeserving, but my begrudging attitude is never, ever justified. I'm told to give, not to interrogate. Who cares if I'm misused? Why does it really matter? That is their sin. My stinginess, my fear, my unwillingness to love and share, those are my sins and the things I must worry to do something about. It is only in the times where I've let go of myself and my needs and my wants that I've been able to see the situation clearest. During those times, I know best when to say no, and have been able to recognize that my father did not always say yes. After all, he is the one that rejected the marriage proposals and sent those men far, far away. And our rent has always been paid, our stomachs filled. And somehow there was often a new movie to watch together as a family. And year-round, Dad gave us gifts. He made sure I had a car. He paid for my phone, still pays for it. He provided me with my own home, and so much more. Sometimes it was very hard. And yet, looking back, there were times it was very good. The only difference had been that before I'd been younger, more innocent, and joyfully willing to love everyone. I just had to learn how to do that once more, with grown-up eyes, in a world that says, you mustn't love that way. Surely even God doesn't expect so much. I'm not so sure about that. I think God expects us to wish to do more than He asks of us, and to do so in a way that exemplifies His unconditional, rich, inclusive love. How I love the parable of the feast where all the poor outcasts were invited. How well my Father has taught me what that looks like lived out in real life. How much I yearn to be she who opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy, as it says in Proverbs 31, verse 20. It's not always pleasant sharing your home, but let it never be said that we are like Sodom. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 49. It's not always pleasant not being able to have what you want because someone else needs something. It's even less pleasant doing without what you might need as you give to another. But when are we told to seek our own pleasure and comfort? And why would I want even to do such a thing when someone has shown me they are suffering, even if their suffering is their own fault? Should I excuse away my duty because the majority of Christianity has given me permission? Why would I want to continue promoting such uncharity? This last year has taught me so much of what it means to love. To open my home to the lonely, whether by hosting parties or offering tea to a tired guest of my father's. To write a letter to a young woman in prison who's been awaiting trial for nearly 2 years. To engage in conversations with the neighbor woman who only speaks of distasteful things. To continue serving, finding ways that I might serve. And let it never be from some twisted sense of ego, but from a closer walk with my Heavenly Father, who says I must reflect His light and bring His love to His children. Let it be so. Let me love. My home is open. My heart is ready. My hands are turned. My lips are ready to say, I will hand out and help up whatever it is you ask of me. I have many coats. I have much food. I have many books and couches and tea. And if none ask, let me be ready to ask, What do you need? How might I help? And the people asked him, saying, What shall we do then? He answereth and saith unto them, He that hath 2 coats, let him impart to him that hath none, and he that hath meat, let him do likewise. Luke chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. A young woman sent me a friend request a few months ago. Because I'm just as blunt as friendly, I asked, Do we know each other? She said no, but I'll be moving into the area soon, and was told you'd be a good friend to have. How nice. Do you have a place to stay? I do not. You are more than welcome to live with our family. And people have since asked me, And what did your parents think about it all? I actually forgot to tell them until the day before she arrived, but I knew they wouldn't care. This girl has become like a sister to all of us. Even though she no longer lives with us, we see her all the time. Sure, opening your home is hard, and maybe strange. But oh, how blessed it is to share God's love.